again, it
I
was,
guess I haven't done that because everything's sort of moving quickly and things are up in the air. If there's particular days that you all have asked to have off or you're not available and you've told me about it, just assume those days are going to be off.
Okay.
I just was, I don't know what I was waiting for, just to sort of see how things go this week and then ask the state about where we are.
Okay.
I wasn't sure if we were going faster than planned or as planned. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
while we wait for the jury again, it's one thing to hear it described, but those jurors had to view that, and then they have to go home. People who are part of the system, the medical examiner, the prosecutors, defense attorneys, we've all become used to and sort of desensitized by what it was that we see. But these jurors are everyday people, and these are not part of their job, not part of what they go through every day. And they saw all of this. I really find it hard to think that 17 times they'll be able to consider what they viewed, the aggravating factors that were put in, and specifically the ones that tied into what was presented yesterday: heinous, atrocious, and cruel, cold, calculated, premeditated, disregard in general for human life, and the way that some of the deaths have been described so far, that those jurors aren't going to be able to find one aggravating factor for each of the victims, if not many. And then the defense has a long hill to climb to show the mitigating factors that are going to counteract not only one, but potentially 7 aggravating factors as to each victim.
It's hard to imagine that defense could counteract that, because the jurors not only had seen that surveillance video, but yesterday they saw it again in conjunction with the description of how these victims died. The medical examiner was up there talking about how Peter Wang was shot 12 times and had an additional graze as well, and how after he was shot, Nikolas Cruz went over him and continued to shoot him after he was on the ground. So it is very hard to imagine how the defense is going to counter this. Obviously, they have their mitigating circumstances, that there were mental and behavioral issues, red flags that were missed, but how that will possibly outweigh any of these aggravating circumstances is extremely tough to imagine.
A difficult job for the jurors to have to consider all of this, but moreover, the way that the prosecution presented their factual story yesterday, they weaved in the last remaining surviving victim, how Cruz got there using the Uber driver, and then the way they introduced the evidence through the Sergeant Crespo, and particularly the photos, the casings, the magazines.
Jurors are entering.
And the jury is walking in right now.
Reaching a crescendo,
yes,
where the firearm comes in.
Right.
And they all see it, and then they go back to pictures and descriptions, and they show the power of that gun. Again, it's all part of the way the state's presenting their case, and as the judge just pointed out, things are moving quickly.
They are. The attorneys wanted to talk about the calendar for September and October, and the judge said, well, I was actually hoping that we could see how this week goes. Remember, this is a short week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They won't be in session Thursday and Friday, but right now we're on witness. I believe we will be hearing from witness number 56 today, and this is just the beginning of week 2.
And, you know, who knows what's going to take place on Thursday and Friday. The judge finally ruled on the defense's motion to not allow the jury view. Perhaps that's what's going to happen Thursday and Friday. We won't know.
Let's listen.
Morrison, please.
Good morning, sir. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, sir. You can put your hand down and be seated. Please lean into the microphone so we can hear you and state your full name and spell your last name.
Michael Morrison, Morrison.
Good morning, Mr. Morrison. How are you?
Good morning, sir.
How are you employed, sir?
I'm sorry?
How are you employed? Are you working?
Yes, sir.
What do you do?
I am a paving crew leader for the city of Tamarack.
Okay. I'd like to call your attention to February the 11th, 2017. How were you employed on that date?
I owned a business, Sunrise Tactical Supply.
Okay. And how long had you owned Sunrise Tactical Supply?
I believe we opened in 2013.
Okay. And what type of things would you sell at Sunrise Tactical Supply?
We were a licensed firearms dealer, ammunition, holsters. We did classes, concealed weapons classes. It related to the trade.
Okay. And you started the business in 2013?
Correct.
Okay. When you sell a firearm, what is the procedure that's used?
Procedure is the customer who wants to purchase needs to fill out a Form 4473. Once that's completed, a background check is then submitted. The information from that form is submitted to the state, and upon an approved control number coming back from the state, the firearm is either released the same day to a person with a concealed weapons permit, or there is a 5 business day wait without the concealed weapons permit, which does not include weekends and holidays.
Okay. And where was Sunrise Tactical located?
7600 Wiles Road.
Okay. And a 4473, that's a federal form?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And were you the custodian of records of that form?
Yes, sir.
At Sunrise Tactical? Okay, Mr. Morrison, I want to show you now State's Exhibit Mark 19V for identification, sir. And if you would look at that and see if you recognize it.
This is Mr. Cruz's 4473.
Okay. And were you present when it was filled out?
Yes, I was, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to offer State's Exhibit 19B, and I showed it to Mr. Wheeler.
Is there any objection?
No, ma'am.
States Exhibit 19B, like Victor, will be received as States 335. $335, I think. 355, excuse me, thank you. 355.
Can you see this okay, Mr. Morrison?
Yes, sir.
On your screen? So, and you were present for this sale, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so how was this form completed? Could you run through with us how it's done?
Person comes in, picks out their selection. Once the selection is made, the customer is given a 4473 to fill out.
Okay,
It's to have their name, their current address. Then there's several questions that have to be answered. Once they've completed their portion of it, it is signed stating that the information they provided is true and accurate.
okay. So in State's Exhibit 355, which is the 4437 form, The Nikolas Jacob Cruz, that's filled out by him, right? The purchaser, Nikolas Jacob Cruz, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he fills out the address and the
Yes, sir.
city and the county, right?
Yes, sir.
And place of birth, that's his writing,
Yes, sir.
correct? And he fills out the height, 5'7", weight, 128 pounds, right?
Correct.
Male, and his date of birth, right?
Yes, sir.
And someone who is going to purchase a weapon, in this case a rifle, have to be 18 or over, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then, Mr. Morrison, let me see if I'm so bad at this. These questions here. The wheel. All right, that's not too bad. So, are you the actual transferee buyer of the firearm listed on the form? If you're not the actual transfer buyer, you are acquiring the firearm on behalf of another person. If you are not the actual transferee buyer, the licensee cannot transfer the firearm to you. Exception if you are picking up a repaired firearm for another person and you are not required to answer 11A and may proceed to question 11B. See instructions for question 11A. Who fills out? Yes.
Yes.
He does, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you under indictment or information in any court for a felony or any other crime for which the judge could imprison you for more than 1 year? See instructions for question 11B. The check mark, no. He does that.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Have you ever been convicted of a felony, convicted in any court of a felony or any other crime for which the judge could have you imprisoned you for more than 1 year, even if you received a shorter sentence, including probation? See instructions for question 11C. He writes no, correct?
Correct.
And that's his check mark, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you a fugitive from justice? See instructions for question 11D. He writes no, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Are you an unlawful user of or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance? Warning. The use or possession of marijuana remains unlawful under federal law, regardless of whether it has been legalized or decriminalized for medicinal or recreational purposes in the state where you reside. And he checks no, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's his check mark? Okay. Have you ever been adjudicated as a mental defective, or have you ever been committed to a mental institution? See instruction for question 11F. He checks no, correct?
Correct.
That's his check mark? Okay. Have you ever been discharged from the armed forces under dishonorable conditions? His check mark, no, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you subject to a court order restraining you from harassing, stalking, or threatening your child or an intimate partner or a child of such partner? See instructions for question 11H. He check marks no, correct? That's his check mark?
Correct,
Okay.
sir.
Have you ever been convicted in any court of a misdemeanor crime or domestic violence? See instructions for question 11I. That's his check mark, right?
Correct, no.
12, country of citizenship, United States of America. That's his check mark, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then 12B, have you ever renounced your United States citizenship? His check mark, no, correct, Mr. Morrison?
Correct.
Okay. Are you an alien illegally or unlawfully in the United States? Check mark, his check mark, no, correct?
Correct.
Are you an alien who has been admitted to the United States under a non-immigrant visa? And he's checked no, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then if yes, you fall within any of the exceptions stated in the instructions, and he puts a check mark under NA, not applicable, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that's the first page, correct?
Yes, sir. Correct.
Okay. And he fills that out himself.
Yes.
Okay. And then the second page. That's his signature right there, and the date, 2/11/2017. Can you see that, or see the top line? Number 14, transferee, buyer signature?
Yeah, yes,
Okay, and the date, the certification date, that's the date that he comes in to make the purchase?
yes, sir,
So February the 11th, 2017, correct?
correct.
And then it says type of firearm, long gun, who makes that check?
That is made by the employee of the store, the clerk.
Okay, and when you were working that day, did you have an employee working with you?
Yes, sir.
And what's that person's name?
David Martinez.
Okay, and line 13, identification, is that Mr. Martinez's handwriting?
Yes, sir.
And then number or identification, what's that?
That is the license, that's the number on the driver's license or ID from the state.
Okay. And the expiration date, 9/24/205, right?
Correct.
So you check identification, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in that, your form, you have this identification, right?
Yes, sir.
And that is a Florida identification card, right?
Yes, sir.
Nikolas Jacob Cruz, his address in Parkland, and that and date of birth, and that matches what he had put on the 4473 form, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you demand identification, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the third page, what's this?
The signature line on the third page is what needs to be signed upon the release of the firearm.
Okay. And the description at 24, the manufacturer, importer, S&W, what's that stand for?
Smith & Wesson
And M&P Sport 2,
is the model of the rifle.
TF 16214,
Serial number.
okay. And type rifle.
Yes, sir.
And then the caliber 5.56-223, what's that mean?
Yes, sir. That's the caliber that the rifle is rated to shoot.
Okay. And of course it has Sunrise Tactical and your address on there, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you recognize Mr. Martinez's signature?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so this, the transfer was 2/18 of 2017, right?
Yes, sir.
And that you explained to us before, the 5-day, has to be 5-day waiting period if you don't have a concealed weapons permit,
Correct, excluding weekends and holidays.
Okay. And part of this form is your sales slip. And do you recognize
Yes, sir.
that? Okay. You see when it says paid, whose handwriting that is?
That's mine.
Okay. And the price of the weapon was $618.74?
Correct.
Okay. So before, what's the procedure for when you meet someone who comes in to the store to buy a gun? What do you do? And what did you do in this case during the sale? Do you have any procedures you follow?
Every customer is engaged in conversation. We look for any red flags, any signs that why the sale should not happen. If for any reason anyone was uncomfortable with anything about the sale did not happen, period.
Okay. And did you engage that conversation with Nikolas Cruz?
I had a brief conversation, I believe, on pickup, as I stated in my deposition. I came out and asked him, what are you going to do with the rifle? And the reply was, I go shooting with my friends on the weekends. I just want my own stuff.
Okay. All right. Let me show you now State's Exhibit 270. And it's made safe, Mr. Morrison. So. Do you recognize what this is?
That is the M&P Sport Rifle.
Okay, and do you know where the serial number is?
It would be on probably the opposite side of the magazine well,
Okay.
or on the receiver by the trigger, right here on the bottom.
Okay, TF 16214, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is the rifle you sold Nikolas Cruz, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, when you sold this gun, were there any additions made? In other words,
No, sir, there was nothing on the rifle when it left the store.
Okay, so this weapon here has a bipod,
Yes, sir.
right? Right?
Correct.
Is that on the weapon?
No, sir.
Okay, and it has, well, why don't you tell us what else it has that wasn't sold with?
It did not have the bipod. It did not have the vert grip. The sight may have been in the box because there was no rear sight on it. It's a standard flat top receiver, and there was no sling.
Okay, all right. Mr. Morrison, thank you very much. Your Honor, I have no further questions of Mr. Morrison.
Defense, do you have any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
That's it.
Oh, sure, I'm sorry.
Mr. Morrison, good morning.
Morning.
You mentioned on direct that an 18-year-old could walk into the store and purchase a firearm. Is that accurate?
At that particular time, yes.
Is it accurate now?
No, sir.
What is it now?
It's 21.
Irrelevant.
Overruled.
You can answer the question, sir.
21.
You have to be 21 years old to purchase a firearm,
Yes, sir.
regardless if it's a small handgun or a high-velocity rifle.
Correct.
I'm not sure if you can see what I'm looking at here. You see that?
No, sir.
Is it working?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So who can't buy a firearm?
Pardon me?
Who can't buy a firearm?
Convicted felon.
Okay. Anyone else?
Person who is using marijuana medically. Anyone domestic violence. There's a when you do the background check, the information is submitted to the state. So the state determines that control number, whether it's an approval or not.
All right, and you mentioned there's an additional, I guess, hedge the person would have to jump over. When they walk into your store, you would have this interaction with them, right?
Yes, sir.
The salesperson, according to the form here, was your employee David Martinez. Is that correct?
Correct.
Would he be the person interacting with Mr. Cruz?
We both were. We both engaged. It was busy, and we both, at some point or another, engage with customers.
Okay.
So it's not uncommon for two of us to engage with one customer.
Well, you mentioned that you had this conversation with him upon pickup of the weapon. That's after the 5-day waiting period, correct?
Correct.
So is it safe to assume that Mr. Martinez helped them in the initial selection of the firearm?
Yes.
Okay. And he would have that interaction, that initial interaction with them?
Yes, sir.
Judge, can I have a second?
Sure.
Nothing further. Thanks, Judge.
Okay, is there anything else, Dave?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. You're excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, can I put the weapon back?
Sure.
So that was witness number 56, Michael Morrison. He owned a tactical shop in Sunrise where Nikolas Cruz purchased his Smith & Wesson sport rifle. He said no modifications were made to it.
Dr. McDougall?
We're waiting to hear from another witness who we believe is going to be a medical examiner. But they focused in on the forms that he filled out. As you know, Nikolas Cruz had no convictions, he had no criminal history, he was legally able to buy the gun, and he filled out in that form that he had no issues with marijuana.
No issues with drug addiction, no issues with prior mental health commitment, not necessarily treatment. But the significance of this witness, there are several aspects of his testimony that are significant. The form that, in fact, was filled out, that Cruz filled it out, that he went in there and answered those questions. So that will become significant later on when the defense starts talking about when his mental health conditions developed, at what point in time, if he was aware of them, if he was getting treatment.
So is the defense going to say he was lying, he actually did have mental health issues, but he was lying on that form?
They're either going to say that, or they're going to say that at the time he didn't realize he had these conditions, and that was because, as we've seen, they're trying to shift the blame to the school system, to Broward County, that nobody recognized what his problem was. The other significance is he talked about what items were added to the firearm after it was purchased, the fact that he purchased it and said to him, I just need my own weapon to go out shooting with my friends. Again, premeditation, building his story.
This is witness number 57. Let's take a listen.
I do.
Thank you. You can put your hand down and be seated. And when you're seated, please state your full name and spell your last name for the record.
My name is Rebecca McDougall, MacDougall.
And doctor, what is your occupation?
I'm the chief medical examiner at the Broward County Medical Examiner's Office.
And how long have you been the chief medical examiner at the Broward County Medical Examiner's Office?
Since June of 2021.
Okay, and before that, could you describe your work history?
I can. Education as well.
Please.
Okay, I did my undergraduate at the University of Texas. I went to medical school at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, Texas. I did a 4-year anatomic and clinical pathology residency at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. And I did a 1-year forensic pathology fellowship at the Broward County Medical Examiner's Office.
Okay, and how about your work experience?
After I completed my fellowship in June of 2011, I stayed on at Broward as an associate medical examiner.
Okay. You have any medical licenses?
I do.
Where?
In Texas, New Jersey, Mississippi, and Florida.
Okay. And are you on any boards? American Board of Pathology?
So I do have my boards in anatomic and forensic pathology.
Okay. All right. How many autopsies in your career, doctor, would you say that you have performed?
About 3,500.
Okay. And of those 3,500, could you give us an approximation how many times you were able to determine the cause of death?
3,500.
Okay. And of those 3,500, just again, an approximation if you can, how many of those autopsies were the cause of death was gunshot wounds?
Probably 1,000.
Okay. I'd like to call your, have you ever testified as an expert in forensic pathology?
I have.
How many times?
Over 100.
And in what courts?
Palm Beach County and Broward County.
Okay. I'd like to call your attention to Thursday, February the 15th, 2018. Were you working on that day?
I was.
Okay. And were you called upon to perform certain autopsies?
I was.
Okay. And did you perform an autopsy on a young man named Alex Schachter?
I did.
Okay. I'd like to show you now, ma'am, state exhibits 17T, 17S, 17R, 17Q, 17P, 17O, 17N, 17M, 17L, and I'm whether this was already in evidence. So with those exhibits, Dr. McDougall, do you recognize what those photographs are?
I do.
And were they taken during the course of your autopsy of Alex Schachter on Thursday, February the 15th, 2018?
They were.
Okay. And would they assist you in explaining to the court and to the jury the nature of Alex Schachter's wounds?
They would.
And would they assist you in describing the manner and cause of death?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to offer these exhibits.
Is there any objection?
I just need to review them quickly if I may.
Sure.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
You want your chair, Lou? Thank you.
may I first?
Sure. You may?
After the court reviews them, we could get a sidebar brief, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
ma'am.
So the headsets are on right now. They're in a quick sidebar. This is going to be tough to watch because this is the autopsy of Alex Schachter. His dad, Max, has been in the courtroom every day, just about, and we've seen the pain that Max has felt listening to the details of the deaths of other students, of Alex's classmates, and now he has to listen to details of his own son's death. And he has said publicly that he thinks it's very important for the world to bear witness. So that's why he's been here. That's why he thinks that people should be watching.
The world is certainly going to bear witness. The unfortunate fact is that he is going to bear witness as well. And again, as we've seen in the past with these exhibits, they're shown to the jurors. The screens are blocked off in the courtroom. But if this medical examiner describes in even half of the detail that yesterday's medical examiner described the deaths of the victims, it has to be a really tough time and moment for him to even to have to listen to this. And he made the choice, and all of these parents have made the choice, whether or not they want to be present in court to support their children, their loved ones, the adults who also died here, to give their support visibly to see what's going on. And so he knew this day would be coming. He chose to be present in the courtroom as it was happening. And it's going to be tough for us not to focus on the emotions that he's showing, because during the time when these witnesses are going to be answering the questions, we're not going to see what's going on. And we're going to be looking at him in a moment which is normally reserved for private reflection. But now he wanted everyone to bear witness to this, and so we're all going to be watching him again. This is but one of 17 victims that the state is moving in aggravating factors. They're having medical examiners who have a wealth of experience, and so there's no doubt in anybody's mind as to how these people died, and the force that comes behind their testimony is how brutal these murders were and the suffering that may have taken place.
And the state has been building their case over the last 7 days. So the jury has seen surveillance video, the jury has seen photographs from the scene, the jury has heard from the other students who were in the class. We heard a classmate talk about Alex Schachter and how he looked up and noticed that he was still in his seat, but he was slumped over and he was lifeless. So we've heard that testimony. Now this is almost the final effort that the state is giving to really give this weight, because we've heard a lot of the testimony, the jury has seen some of these pictures, but now to hear the details from the autopsy, that will really bring it home what Nikolas Cruz did.
And we've talked about this before. You're absolutely right. They're going to do this, and they have done this. This is the 6th time that they've done this. They're going to do it 17 times. And that's because the jurors have to look at 17 homicides and decide whether the aggravating factors apply. And so they tell this story and they repeat it and they go into the details.
Objection states 17L as in Larry will be received as 356. 17M like Mary will be received as 357. 17N like Nancy 358. 17O 359. 17P 360, 17Q 361, 17R 362, 17S 363, and 17T like Tom 364.
Thank you, Anna. Dr. McDougall, while the clerk is marking the evidence, could you give us the age, height, and weight of Alex Schachter, please?
I can. He's 14 years old, 105 pounds, and 65 inches in length.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 200, is this Alex Schachter you performed the autopsy on?
Yes.
Oh. Thanks. Okay. Doctor, I want to show you now State's Exhibit marked 356. Can you see that okay?
I can.
Okay. You have one wound labeled A and one B. Could you describe, let's start with A, obviously. Could you describe that to us?
I can. So gunshot wound A is a penetrating gunshot wound to the right side of the chest. It injures the upper lobe of the right lung, and the spinal cord is transected. There's 600 milliliters of blood in the right side of the chest, and the 7th thoracic vertebrae is also fractured.
Okay. Would that wound A in and of itself be fatal?
Yes.
And would Mr. Alex Schachter be able to move, because you said it transected his spine?
Correct. It transects the spinal cord.
Okay.
At the level of the 7th thoracic vertebrae.
And what does that mean?
So he can't move from that level down.
Okay. And gunshot wound B?
So gunshot wound B is also a penetrating gunshot wound. It enters the left side of the chest. It injures skin, soft tissue, and muscle.
Okay.
And there's a contusion on the upper lobe of the left lung.
Okay. Would wound B be fatal in and of itself?
Can be.
Okay. Based on the wound A and B, Dr. McDougall, would those two wounds be consistent with someone standing, or Alex Schachter standing?
Yes,
And why do you say that?
because they go from front to back and downward.
Okay. And I show you now State's Exhibit marked 357. And
So this is the projectile fragment that's recovered from the right side of the upper back.
okay, and that's as a result of which wound?
A.
Okay, and that's why you have the A there showing that that's the exit wound and,
That's correct.
okay. Showing you now State's Exhibit marked 358.
So this is a cluster of ballistic injuries on the upper left shoulder that I labeled C.
Okay. And obviously not fatal, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 359.
So I can't see the letter. So D, E, and F are on the forearm.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. That's okay. So this is a cluster of ballistic injuries that I labeled E. These are on the forearm of the left upper extremity.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 360.
This is another picture of the ballistic injuries to include the injury on his hand.
And State's Exhibit 3.
Sure, thank you.
Did the defense just ask for that sidebar?
The defense just asked for that sidebar after she answered a question as to the nature of one of the injuries. Normally they're doing that because they want to make a motion for a mistrial. There's nothing, there perhaps is something to object to. Here it's not like when they object to the photos and they jump on the headsets and go sidebar. So either the way she answered the question sparks something that's drawing an objection from them or that they believe should be a mistrial. She's simply been describing the manner of the gunshot wounds and their entry and exit much in the same way as all the other medical examiners have done before. So I'm not sure what it is they're objecting to. They've continued to object that this is unnecessary in terms of, in their opinion, relevance, prejudicial value outweighs the probative value. But they've done that routinely before with the pictures and with the questions.
Standard.
And
He's already pleaded guilty. They've already seen
Right.
some pictures. Why do they need these details?
State's response consistently has been we're entitled to establish the aggravating factors, have to do it beyond a reasonable doubt. This adds force to that. It goes to the weight the jury decides, how strong they think these are. Again, I'm not sure what it was in her answer that sparked.
She was talking about a gunshot wound to the hand. So I'm not sure.
It may be that they're anticipating he's going to go in, that the prosecutor is going to ask questions about defensive wounds again, much like he did with a couple of the other victims, and their belief is that it's not a defensive wound, showing that he was still alive after he'd been shot. Again, all of that seems to be somewhat unclear.
Oh, well, we're waiting to hear and see what that's all about. But one thing that you mentioned, David, which was very interesting, the wounds that Alex suffered, very similar to the wounds that some of these other victims suffered. So, you know, a gunshot wound into the right chest, into the lung, into the spinal cord.
It's not the first time we've heard this. And again, in and of itself, if it was perhaps a single victim or if we had heard something similar to it, you know, often in shootings, people happen to be hit the same way. But the thing that stood out to me is that these all appeared to come from what they call shots to the body. And so the question is he spraying the room with gunfire and he happens to be lucky as to where people are sitting or standing and he hits them?
Or is it a deliberate attempt to kill somebody, shooting at center of mass, knowing how you're going to inflict the most damage?
It'll be interesting to hear how the prosecution uses that testimony in their closing statements, whether they do exactly that, say that he was not only killing these people, but he was targeting them. He had a plan to it. He had trained on how to do it. He knew where he would do the most damage with this powerful weapon. But again, what jumped out was this is not the first time we've heard a medical examiner talk about a shot that goes through the center of the body. We've heard about it going through the heart, the lungs, and several times shattering the spinal column. And so was this a deliberate effort by Cruz to make sure that each shot he fired counted, or was it simply the force, the power, and the magnitude of this weapon that no matter how many shots you fired, if you're spraying a room with this gun, it's going to do the maximum amount of damage, which again, for what the Schachters are wanting the world to witness and see, what the world is also witnessing and seeing is the sheer power of this particular rifle that's sold and available, and at the time was available to an 18-year-old. Now you have to be 21 years old to purchase that weapon. But we're not only seeing the power of the singular death of any of these victims, but the power of the weapon, the damage that it could cause. It looks like they're flipping through pictures, so it may have something to do with a question or an answer, and they're concerned
about... Well, the pictures of the wounds to the victims, they've already been entered into evidence. That was last week.
Well, these particular pictures...
not the autopsy pictures.
Right. These came in today, and you can see what I meant when I said they were looking through the pictures. It appeared that Michael Satz was flipping over some pictures at the podium that either he had shown or was going to show to the medical examiner, who's then describing it to the jurors. They're seeing it right in front of them on their screens, as is the defense and the prosecution seeing it on the screens in front of them. We're not, the people in the gallery are not seeing it.
Correct. Well, and if you notice, the screen in front of Michael Satz sort of has a wiggle mark on it. I think that's probably, you look at it at a certain angle and it obscures the image. For those of you at home who are maybe just joining us, there's no one big screen in the room for everyone to see. Each juror in their jury box, they each have a screen where they can look at the evidence that has been submitted. The attorneys also have a screen as well, and now they're taking off their headsets. So let's see what this was all about.
Okay, Doctor. I want to show you now State's Exhibit marked 362.
These are fragments of projectiles that were collected from the left upper extremity, so from those ballistic injuries.
Okay. And State's Exhibit marked 363.
This is a jacket fragment that was recovered from the left chest.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 364.
This is the projectile fragment that was recovered from the back.
Okay. And the cause of death of Alex Schachter.
It's multiple gunshot wounds.
Doctor. I'm going to show you now State's Exhibits 18G, 18F, 18E, 18O, or I guess it's D, 18C, 18B, 18A, and 17Z. Can I ask you, Doctor, can you identify these exhibits?
Yes.
Okay. And what are they?
Those are autopsy photographs that were taken during Alyssa Aldaheff's autopsy.
Okay. And you performed the autopsy on Alyssa Alhadeff?
I did.
Okay. And would those exhibits that I read into the record assist you in explaining to the court and to the jury the nature of wounds that you discovered during the autopsy of Alyssa Alhadeff?
They will.
And would they also help you in explaining the cause of death of Alyssa Alhadeff?
They will. They will.
Your Honor, I'd like to offer these exhibits now. I'll show them to Mr. Cruz.
Okay.
Can I approach?
You may. Thank you. Okay, is there any objection to the introduction of 17Z as well as 18A through G for identification regarding the autopsy of Alyssa Alhadeff?
Yes, ma'am, we renew and object pursuant to ground detailing DMIL 12.
Okay, thank you. Over the defense objection states 17Z as in zebra for identification will be received as 365. 18A like alpha will be received as 366. 18B like Bravo will be received as 367. 18C like Charlie will be received as 368. 18D like Delta will be received as 369. 18E will be received as 370. 18F like Frank, 371, and 18G like George, 372.
Thank you, Hon.
Thank you.
Dr. McDougall, while clerk is marking those exhibits, could you tell us the age, height, and weight of Alyssa Alhadeff?
I can. 14 years old, 111 pounds, 62 inches.
Okay, and showing you State's Exhibit 199, is that Alyssa Alhadeff?
Yes.
Okay, Doctor, let's show you State's Exhibit 365. And there's two wounds marked A and B. Could you describe that for us?
I can. These are two what we call graze wounds to the top of the head, labeled A and B.
Okay, and what type of damage would A and B do?
To the scalp.
Just how
So
deep?
only the skin on top of the head.
Okay. And how deep were those graze wounds?
Not very deep.
Okay,
The skull underneath was fine.
okay. And State's Exhibit 366.
So this is an entrance gunshot wound to the left side of the chest.
Okay, and what? Where did that go? And
So this has three corresponding defects on her back. This entrance gunshot wound injures the lung, the left ventricle of the heart, the great vessels of the heart, and the left lung.
and you label this gunshot wound C, correct?
That's correct.
Would gunshot wound C be fatal in and of itself?
Yes.
Okay. And you have an exit, K, L, and M, is that
Correct.
correct?
That's correct.
All right, showing you State's Exhibit 367. Okay, and the light, but
So these are,
let me see if I can get that light out of the way. Okay.
so K, L, and M are exit wounds. K and M are what we called shored exits. That means that that part of her body was up against a hard surface when that projectile tried to exit the body.
Could you, with the aid of the telestrator, you see the different colors on there?
Show my work.
All right. Could you explain to us what a shored exit wound looks, why you say that?
You can select a color and then use your hand.
Okay, so an exit gunshot wound is usually lacerated when it comes out of its target. Usually leaves just a simple laceration. When that part of the body is up against a hard object, whether it's the floor or a wall, when that projectile tries to come out of the body, it goes up against that wall and causes an abrasion. So that's what this is right here. And this kind of triangular shape right here by the wound.
Okay. And there's no shoring to L.
Correct.
Okay. And that's an exit wound from one projectile?
So since these are high velocity rounds, they often fragment when they go through the body. So I only have one entrance wound, and I have 3 separate exits. L could very well be a little fragment of that projectile.
Okay. And showing you now State's Exhibit 368.
So these are entrance gunshot wounds F and G. F is to the lower abdomen on the left side at the pelvis, and G is to the left thigh.
Okay. And let's take gunshot wound F. What damage?
Skin, soft tissue, and a lot of the vessels in the pelvis.
Okay. And G?
G injures skin, soft tissue, muscle, and bone.
Okay. And now showing you State's Exhibit 369.
So this is the gunshot wound that I labeled E. This is an entrance gunshot wound through the left hand.
Okay. What is a defensive wound?
So defensive wounds are wounds that are typically on the extremities of a person, hands or legs. Usually they'll use their extremities to shield their core, whether their head or their abdomen or their chest, to try to stop some sort of injury.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 370.
So this is the gunshot wound that I labeled D. This is the exit wound that corresponds with E.
Okay. And on State's Exhibit 370, is that the entrance wound just below it?
That's correct.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 372.
So this is the right shoulder and the right arm. These are gunshot wounds that were labeled H, I, and J.
Okay. And could you tell us the path and any damage that H, I, and J caused?
I can. I and J are, so I is the entrance, J is the exit, skin, soft tissue, and muscle. H is an exit wound to a corresponding wound on the right upper chest.
Okay. And did you label the wound on the right upper chest?
I did not.
Okay. But where would it be on the body?
It's like right here.
Okay. And H would be the exit?
That's correct.
Okay. And the cause of death of Alyssa Alhadeff?
Is multiple gunshot wounds.
Okay. And Dr. McDougall, did you perform a third autopsy on Thursday, February the 15th, 2018?
I did.
Okay. And I want to show you now State's Exhibits 18S, 18R, 18I, 18Q, 18P, 18O, 18N, 18M, 18L, 18K, and 18J. And ask you, Dr. McDougall, if you can recognize these exhibits.
I do.
Okay. And what are they?
There are pictures taken at the autopsy of Mr. Beigel and also a photo from the scene.
Okay. And do those photographs truly and accurately depict Scott Beigel as you performed the autopsy?
They do.
And would they assist you in explaining to the court and to the jury the nature of Scott Beigel's wounds?
They would.
And would they assist you in explaining the cause of death of
Yes,
Scott
sir.
Beigel? And showing you states 284? Is that Scott Beigel?
It is.
Okay. Okay, Your Honor, at this time I'd like to offer those exhibits that the identification numbers, letters that I read into. Approach.
You may. Thank you. Okay, is there any objection from the defense?
Please have me just renew objections pursuant to DNA 12.
Okay, over the defense objection, 18I will be received as 373. 18J will be received as 374. 18K, 375. 18L, as in Larry, 376. 18M, like Mary, 377. 18N, like Nancy, 378. 18O, 379. 18P, like Paul, 380. 18Q, 381. 18R, 382. And 18S, like Sam, 383.
Dr. McDougall, while the clerk is marking those exhibits, could you give us the age, height, and weight of Scott Beigel, please?
I can. He's 35 years old, 160 pounds, and 68 inches in length.
5'8"?
Correct.
All right, Dr. McDougall, I want to show you State's Exhibit 374. And you have two letters there marking two injuries, D and E.
That's correct.
Okay.
So D and E are entrance gunshot wounds on the left lateral torso. So that's along the left side of the middle of your torso.
Okay, and gunshot wound D, could you describe that to us?
So D and E are clustered together because they hit a lot of the same objects and they're so close in proximity on the body. Together they injure the upper and lower lobes of the left lung, the pericardial sac, which is the sac that holds the heart, the major vessels that come out of the heart, which are the pulmonary arteries, the aorta, and the pulmonary trunk, the upper, middle, and lower lobes of the right lung, fractures the second rib on the right side of the chest, and there are 500 milliliters of blood in the left side of the chest, the right side of the chest, and 750 milliliters of blood in the left side of the chest.
Would D in and of itself been fatal?
Yes.
And E in and of itself been
Correct.
fatal?
Yes.
All right, show you now State's Exhibit marked 375. And you have that marked F.
So this is an entrance gunshot wound to the left side of the back.
Okay, and could you describe that to us?
I can. This wound enters and injures skin, soft tissue, and muscle. The vertebrae, the thoracic vertebrae at the level of the 8th and 9th thoracic vertebrae, and the spinal cord.
Okay. And State's Exhibit marked 376. Marked A.
This is gunshot wound. This is an exit wound A. So this is from DE or F. And this is where part of the projectile exited the body.
Okay, and that's the right part of the chest?
That's correct.
Okay. And State's Exhibit marked 377.
So this is an entrance and exit gunshot wound. C is the entrance. B is the exit.
Okay. And showing you now. State's Exhibit marked 378.
So this is a projectile fragment that I recovered from the right lung.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 379.
This is a fragment of jacket that I recovered from the thoracic spine.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 380.
This is a jacket fragment that I recovered from the right pleural cavity. So that's the cavity that holds your right lung.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 381.
So these are projectile and jacket fragments that were recovered from the soft tissue of the right side of the chest.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 382.
So our office has a Lodox x-ray machine. It takes full body x-rays of everybody that comes into our office. So this is the full body x-ray that we took of Mr. Beigel when he came in,
And what does it indicate?
that he's got high velocity injuries.
All right, how can you tell that?
From the difference, from all the snowstorm, so the projectiles fragment, and you see all the different fragments of the projectile in the x-ray.
And how do you differentiate that? How do you know it's a fragment?
Because they're smaller than other projectiles.
No, I mean, what does it indicate? I mean, what are you pointing out to us that indicates they're fragments?
Do you want me to? Where's my color here? All these right here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. And the cause of death of Scott Beigel, doctor?
Is multiple gunshot wounds.
Okay. Your Honor, I have no further questions of Dr. McDougall.
Okay, defense, any questions?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. You're excused. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we're going to take a 15-minute recess. Please leave your notepads behind. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else.
Your Honor, can we go sidebar for a second before the jury leaves?
So a brief sidebar before the jury leaves for a 15-minute break. That was Dr. Rebecca McDougall. She's the chief medical examiner in Broward. 3 victims that she identified and whose wounds she looked at and whose autopsies she performed.
We heard a significant number of similar comments that were made yesterday as well as from the first medical examiner. Let's see what the sidebar was about. Maybe they're taking an extended break.
Sometimes witnesses go faster than expected. Sometimes they go slower than expected. We do our best to try to anticipate how long witnesses will take so that we can break at noon for lunch and so on and so forth. Today, it just so happens that the witness testimony went faster than expected, so we do not have the state's witness presentation is not scheduled to continue until 1 o'clock. So we are going to break. It's about 10:45 now. We're going to ask you to please be back at 12:45. So you have a 2-hour break, right? 10 to 12:45. Please be back in the usual place. Please do not discuss the case or begin deliberating while you're on the recess. Please remember that if anyone approaches you or tries to make conversation with you about the case, tell the person to stop and report the matter immediately. Please leave your notepads behind. And other than that, I will see you all in a few hours.
Okay, so they're going to take an early lunch and an extended break. They'll be back at 12:45.
I mean, sometimes this happens. They had witnesses for this morning. They didn't know what cross would happen or not happen. They didn't know how quickly they'd get through the evidence they were going to introduce. And as we just heard the judge explain to the jurors, they ran out of witnesses for the morning, and their next witness can't be there until 1 o'clock. So everybody gets an extended break now. It'll give both the defense and prosecution a chance to go through some things, some housekeeping matters. Perhaps he'll line up an additional number of witnesses for this afternoon just in case. We don't know. But again, they've been moving quickly through these witnesses. Lack of cross-examination is one thing that's contributed to it. The streamlining of the objections that the defense was interposing has allowed this to move faster. And so that's why things are moving along a lot quicker, really, than anybody anticipated. But getting back to the discussion you and I were having before about the ME's testimony, this medical examiner mentioned
was introduced as 373, but it was never published to the jury.
Okay.
The state would like to withdraw 373.
Is there any objection?
So there's no objection to the withdrawal, but our position would include the other photographs from last week, that there be an instruction to the jury that some items have been moved into evidence and the state is withdrawing them from evidence. Just like we would do if we're striking testimony of a witness or striking other things. So when the jury comes back, if you could just advise them that the state is in fact doing that and that they shouldn't infer anything from it. That's the request from the defense.
We object to that. I don't see if the jury didn't see it. Why would we have to announce that we're withdrawing?
If something is moved into evidence, it means it goes back to the jury room, whether or not it's published in open court, and now they're taking a piece of evidence that has been admitted and they're withdrawing it. which means that there's a piece of evidence that will no longer be subject to the review of the jury. So that's the request of the defense.
Well,
I'm sorry, Mr.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And that would just include those other items from last
There's
week?
only one.
Okay, I don't remember.
So there's 2 photos total. Let me think about this, because the issue that I have is without highlighting, they haven't seen it, so without describing it, I don't know how I would reference it, other than saying,
This is a photograph that the defense objected to. If they're withdrawing their objection, then fine, we'll just leave it in.
We're not withdrawing our objection to this photograph and whatever the photograph was from last week. We brought that objection to the attention of the state, and they were in disagreement with us. They moved it into evidence, and now it appears that they agree that that picture is prejudicial, and that's why they're withdrawing it. So there is a photograph, several photographs that have been admitted into evidence over the objection of the defense. If the state is going to withdraw or strike that evidence, I think that there should be an instruction to the jury that 2 photographs, one admitted in through the testimony of the medical examiner, and I can't remember the other one, but I can figure it out at lunch. The state of Florida has withdrawn that evidence, and that they shouldn't, it's no longer for their consideration, and that they should make no inferences from that, similar to when we strike testimony, Judge.
Well, they've never heard it like testimony they would have heard. They haven't seen this photograph. And I do not, and no one in this team feels that it is prejudicial. The reason we did it, we thought it was duplicitous, and that's why we didn't do it. And we have been doing that continually because, for instance, on one of the autopsy photographs, there were 84 photographs during the autopsy, and we only introduced 15. So we're just trying to be very careful and not being duplicitous or putting anything in that was, would be considered, more gruesome than it should be. So that's all we're doing. If the defense is going to withdraw their objection to those photos, we're fine with it. That's by no means am I or anyone else saying they're prejudicial. Since the jury didn't see it and we thought they were duplicitous, we thought we would just do it, but that's why we're doing it, not because we think it's prejudicial.
We're not withdrawing our objection, but I just rest on my other arguments, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
we'll put those 2 exhibits aside, and I'm going to think about it over lunch. And if you all can please be back at 12:45, I would appreciate it. Thank you. What time is it? 12:45?
So explain, these were photographs, these were autopsy photos that have not yet been entered.
Well, actually,
Entered but not published.
Which is what's confusing here. They entered and they moved them in, and then they decided that they were going to publish some of them and not publish others. And so now what he has done, and we saw this happen last week, they moved to withdraw certain exhibits so that they're never going to be sent back to the jury, because once a piece of evidence is admitted, then the jury's allowed to see it, whether it gets published to them while a witness is testifying, if it gets published to them after a witness testifies, that's when it goes back to the jury at some point in time. And so what they've done now is that the defense keeps objecting. They keep saying that it's prejudicial. It's always prejudicial to a defendant, but they're saying the probative value is outweighed by the prejudice. And the prosecution has now said, as we expected they would, we're not saying it's prejudicial. We're just saying, you know what, Judge, it's cumulative and perhaps more graphic than some of the other photos. We put it in, and you know what, we changed our mind about getting it out. And oh, by the way, defense, you objected to it going in to begin with. If you want to withdraw your objection, then, we'll go ahead and give this curative instruction, but you can't have it both ways.
And just so people know, I mean, Mike Satz, the lead prosecutor, explained that there are some autopsies where there are 80-some photos. He said they're not going to show them all. There's not a reason to. They may be more graphic, more gruesome than necessary.
The defense filed a motion pre-trial to cut down on the number of photos that were going to be introduced, and so that's what he said they did. And so, again, the defense is trying to have it both ways. Prosecution is simply trying to make sure that something that's a little perhaps more gruesome or duplicitous doesn't go back to the jury room because they've objected. They're trying to clean up the record. and making sure that it's a clean record that goes to the Court of Appeals. That's all it is. But, you know, getting back to what you and I started to talk about before the sidebar, before Judge sent them to lunch, the fact is that we've heard from 3 medical examiners so far, and these 3 medical examiners have testified about a lot of the same things, and it would be expected because the cause of death for these victims is multiple gunshot wounds.
Correct.
But the last 2 MEs talked about the bullet snowstorm. The first ME talked about the high velocity, the way it spun, the way it exits the body.
The way it fragments inside the body, and sometimes there are multiple exit wounds and one entrance wound.
And this shows the power and the force of the gun, a gun that this defendant chose to purchase and chose to be his weapon of mass destruction. The other thing that was interesting from all 3 of these medical examiners, when they talked about the shots that entered the bodies of these victims, a large number of the 8 victims that we've heard about so far had wounds to their body mass, their chest, their torso. We heard them talk about the ME, talk about the entrance wound goes through the lungs, goes through the heart, severs the spinal column. So this means one of 2 things. Either Cruz was specifically targeting the body mass, which is what they teach you in target practice and where you're going to do the most damage, you're going to cause death, or the sheer power of this weapon. If he's just spraying it in an open area, in a hallway, in a closed area, which is the classroom, that the damage it's going to cause when it hits the victims who are sitting or standing, given his height, the way he's pointing it, is going to be the same.
And either way, aren't those both aggravating factors? Either he planned it, he premeditated it, he knew what he was doing in shooting the center of mass, or he also planned to use a powerful weapon. And we heard from the owner of the store where he purchased it just 3 days prior, and lied, by the way, said that he was going shooting with his friends on the weekends and he just wanted his own gear.
You know, he has been not telling the truth on a number of occasions, as we've heard through testimony of witnesses, of people who encountered him on the way in, on the way out. This is not the first bending of the truth. If you want to go back through it, we heard him tell the Uber driver that he was on his way to a music lesson. We heard him tell former classmates who he was leaving the building on, oh, you know, what's going on? What are your plans for this summer? You know, schools somewhere in Florida, somewhere in Florida. You know, we heard him, you know, talking to this particular witness, the gun store owner. I'm buying it because I want to, you know, have my own gun when we go out shooting. So it's a pattern of his to not tell the truth necessarily on what's going on. Now, that's going to be useful to the prosecution during the mitigation phase when the defense tries to pick apart statements that are made and saying, oh, no, he's being truthful. He's telling the truth about what happened, what didn't happen. And the prosecution will be able to say, when you look at the mitigating factors they've presented, evaluate the truthfulness of his statements in certain facts that he's made when you're evaluating the strength of the mitigating evidence that's there. But again, all of this going to establish it's their case in chief, aggravating factors. They hit on 3 of them again today with this medical examiner. I expect them to keep hammering on those 3 because those are the 3 that are individualized to each of the victims. They're not the general category of prior
convictions. And we've heard so far autopsies from 8 of the victims. So there are 9 victims left. We have to hear about their autopsies. So far, it's just been excruciating for the family members and the loved ones who have been sitting in the gallery. But as you and I have talked about, they feel like it is an important thing not only for them to witness, but for the world to bear witness as well. So court will resume at 1 o'clock this afternoon when the state's next witness takes the stand, and we'll be right there for it. We'll see you then. Welcome back. This is the second week of the sentencing of Nikolas Cruz, confessed Parkland shooter. They are back from a long recess and a early lunch today. I'm being joined by our legal analyst, David Weinstein. I'm Janine Stanwood. Thank you so much for joining us. We heard, the last thing we heard was from the medical examiner.
More powerful testimony as to how several more of the victims died, the manner of death, all consistent with multiple gunshot wounds. And again, we heard repeated testimony just as to the power and the capacity and the velocity of the bullets that are coming out of this weapon that was chosen by Cruz as his weapon of choice. We also heard testimony as to how many of these victims died from gunshot wounds to the center part of their body, showing that Cruz was either aiming for that part of their body or simply the way this weapon operates and the amount of bullets that it sprays out are going to do this damage, whether or not they're aimed that way or not aimed that way. One of the victims they talked about, everyone had believed he had been seated at his desk when this happened, but yet
Alex
Schachter, the medical examiner, spoke about the fact that the bullet seemed to come from up going down, indicating either he tried to get up to go down to get to the floor and was shot in the process, or at some point in time the shooter, Cruz, saw what he was doing was there and had that gun up high and was taking aim at him. But
either way, all three of those victims, according to the medical examiner who looked at them and who performed their autopsies, all of them, cause of death, multiple gunshot wounds.
And again, going to all the aggravating factors, we keep repeating this over and over again, but that's what this penalty phase proceeding is all about. The state proving beyond a reasonable doubt at least one or more aggravating factors as to all 17 of the victims who died. And that's our burden of proof, and they have been going through that. Again, moving at a very fast pace to get this evidence in, most of it as a result of there being no cross-examination. There were a few questions that were asked of some witnesses today. They asked a question of the person who sold the rifle to Cruz, seemingly in an effort perhaps to show that there were flaws either with the state. Rising for the jury.
Okay, the jurors are present. Everyone may be seated. State when you're ready. You may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Rebecca Santiago.
Good afternoon. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. You can go ahead and be seated. If you would please speak into the microphone, state your full name, and spell your last name for the record.
Rebecca Santiago, Santiago.
Good afternoon, Ms. Santiago. How are you?
Good afternoon.
Good. So how are you employed?
I work at the Broward Sheriff's Office Crime Lab in the DNA unit
Okay. And how long have you been with the sheriff's office?
since July 2015.
And always with the DNA lab?
Yes.
Okay. What are your duties and what are your responsibilities at the lab?
I analyze items of evidence for the possible presence of biological material, perform DNA analysis, generate statistics, and write reports.
And how about prior to being employed by the Broward Sheriff's Office, how were you employed?
From December 2013 to January 2015, I was employed at Chromosomal Labs Bodie Technology in Phoenix, Arizona, performing forensic and relationship DNA testing. And from February 2015 to July 2015, I was a technologist with LabCorp.
Okay. And so approximately how many samples of DNA have you examined and analyzed?
At least several thousand.
Okay. So could you tell us something about your education?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biological Sciences from Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a Master's of Forensic Sciences with a concentration in Forensic Molecular Biology from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
Okay. And did your studies include the analysis of DNA?
Yes.
Okay. How about some professional societies and organizations? Do you belong to any?
Yes. I belong to the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and I'm certified by the American Board of Criminalistics in the molecular biology tract.
Okay. What purpose does those societies and organizations play as far as, what you do with DNA analysis?
They provide platforms for members to meet and exchange information.
Okay. And how long have you been involved with those organizations?
The American Academy of Forensic Science, I've been with them since 2015, and the American Board of Criminalistics since 2016.
Have you previously testified to testing and analysis of DNA?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
Approximately 15.
And what courts?
Broward County.
Okay. And the Broward County Lab, is that accredited?
Yes.
And how is it accredited and by whom?
It's accredited by ANAB. That's the ANSI National Accreditation Board, and ANSI is the American National Standards Institute.
Okay. So you've testified as an expert in DNA analysis, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So tell us what DNA is.
DNA is the genetic material. It's passed to us from our parents, and it gives our bodies instructions on how to function.
Okay. And how is it passed on by our parents? I mean, one parent give you something, another parent give you something else?
You get approximately half of your DNA from your mother and half from your father.
Okay. And when you're doing DNA analysis, how do you do that? What do you do? What's your process?
Well, from the beginning, we need to extract the DNA. We need to isolate it from the cellular material and all the proteins in the cell. Then I need to quantify it to know how much DNA is in each sample. So, because the next step, the amplification reaction, it works best with a specific target amount of DNA. So next, I amplify the DNA with a process called PCR, or the polymerase chain reaction. It amplifies target regions of the DNA. And during PCR, a fluorescent tag is added to that copy. Then those copies are put through an instrument during capillary electrophoresis. That instrument detects those molecules based on size, and it reads the tag, and then it generates a profile. And I get profiles from the evidentiary samples, and then I can compare them to reference samples from known individuals.
Okay. So why do you, the extraction process, what does that mean? So you get a swab, say, from a handle of a screwdriver, okay?
Okay.
And somebody swabs it, right? And they're swabbing it for what, DNA, right?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, so somebody touches, let's use the screwdriver as an example. Somebody touches a screwdriver, they may or may not leave DNA, correct?
Possibly, yes.
Okay, so somebody swabs it, right? So, it's, crime scene investigator swabs the screwdriver handle, say, right?
Okay.
Gives the swab to you, right?
Yes.
So the first thing you do, you determine what? If there's any DNA.
First, I would take a cutting of the swab, and then I would go through the extraction procedure that I just mentioned.
Okay, so that's it. What's the extraction procedure mean?
that it breaks open the cells, it isolates the DNA, and it separates it and cleans it up, so then I end up with a little tube of clean DNA.
Okay, and it's a small amount usually, right?
Yes,
And that's why what you do, you amplify it, right?
correct.
And so that's, the next step would be amplification, and you amplicate it because,
First, I would quantify it to determine how much is there, and then I would amplify it because there is such a small amount. And then, as I mentioned, we'd add a tag to it so that we can detect it and visualize it.
okay, and then what happens after that?
Then I develop the profiles, and then I compare the profiles from reference samples to the evidentiary samples.
Okay, so how do you get, describe for us, how do you get a profile? What are you looking at when you get a profile?
It's kind of like a chart. There's different colored peaks on the chart. Those tags that get added during PCR, they each have a specific color to them. And based on the amount of DNA in the sample would correspond to the peak heights in the chart.
Okay, and how many, you're looking for how many peak heights? If your mother gives you one, your father, right?
Correct. So from a single source profile, at each location, you would have 1 or 2 peaks. 1 if you got the same allele from each parent, or 2 if you got different alleles from each parent.
And how is the peak height determined? How much DNA you have?
Correct.
Okay, so you can have a high peak or a low peak?
Yes, it would be proportional to the amount of DNA in the sample.
Okay, and there's locations, correct?
Yes.
Describe how that works.
There are locations on the DNA.
Well, how many locations are you looking at? For instance, if you have one location, you have 2 peak heights, right? So say your father gives you a 17, your mother gives you a 19, right? So you have a 17 and 19 at that location if it's a single source, correct?
Yes.
Okay, then you go to the next location, right?
Okay.
And how many locations are there that you're looking at?
Approximately 24.
Okay, so you go along the 24 locations looking for peak heights, right?
Yes.
If it's a single source, so let's just say you're trying to determine a paternity, right? So, got me so far?
Yes.
So you take a DNA sample, let's say you swab the potential father's cheek, right?
Okay.
And then you have 24 locations you're looking at, right?
Yes.
So those 24 locations, if it's a single source, you'll have 48 peaks, right?
If they're all heterozygote, if they all have 2 peaks at each location.
Okay. What happens if it's not a heterozygote?
Then it would be called a homozygote, and there would be 1 peak because you get the same allele from your mother and the same one from your father.
So if your mom's a 14 and your dad's a 14, you have a homozygote, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And so you've done that process how many times?
Thousands.
Okay. So now once you get a profile, you're trying for 24 locations along, the spectrum, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you have it all spread out, comes out of the computer, correct?
Yes.
And then what do you do?
Then I interpret those results, and then
Yes.
I make the comparisons to the reference standards that I have, and then I perform statistics.
Okay. So what is a reference sample?
It would be a buccal swab or a swab of the inside of someone's cheek, and then I just process that sample the same way that I process the evidentiary samples, and I get a DNA profile. And then I can use that profile to compare to the evidentiary samples.
Okay. So with your evidentiary profile, that's like from the handle of the screwdriver, right?
Right.
And let's say you have, alleles for all 24 locations, right?
Yes.
So you have that, it comes out. How do you describe that?
It's called an electropherogram.
Electropherogram, right? So you have an electropherogram for the evidentiary piece, right?
Yes.
Let's just say it's for the handle of the screwdriver, correct?
Yes.
And then you do an electropherogram, right, for the reference from the person that, to compare it, correct? And, if you get 24 and you compare the two, correct?
Yes.
And how many times have you done that?
Hundreds or maybe thousands.
Okay. So once you perform, is it right to call it the molecular function? The analysis of the DNA?
Statistical analysis?
No, that's what I was going to get to. After you've described the process that you've done, right? And you've done that many times, and has that process been validated?
Yes.
Okay. So once you have done that, there's a second part, right? It's the statistical analysis?
Correct.
So tell us about that and what your training is.
So I have training, I've taken college courses in statistics and population genetics. I've also been trained on the use of statistical analysis in forensic DNA, and I've attended several STR mix workshops and trainings.
Okay. So now you have, you're going to do what's the statistical analysis that you do?
The first that I've done was RMP, or the random match probability.
Okay, and how does that work?
It uses those allele frequencies in formulas, and it determines how rare a profile is.
What's an allele frequency?
The numbers that you were mentioning, 14, 17, each of those are alleles. It corresponds to the repeat units in the section of DNA that I'm looking at. And the frequency is how often it's observed in a population.
Okay, and where do you get how many times it's observed in the population?
So there's databases that contain those allele frequencies. They have sampled various populations and created databases to use for the statistical calculations.
Okay, and are those databases validated and peer-reviewed?
Yes.
Okay, so they're used by labs throughout the country, the different databases?
Yes.
Do you know how the databases are established? What methodology they use to get the samples?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Okay, so how do they get the databases?
Samples from various individuals in different populations are collected. And
Okay, so describe for us then, once you have an accredited, validated database, what statistical analysis do you perform?
the random match probability,
Okay.
or a likelihood ratio.
Okay, let's talk about random match. How does that work?
Those allele frequencies that we were discussing are used in formulas, and then they're multiplied together to determine how rare a profile is.
So, can you describe that to us a little bit better? I mean, you have allele. What's you're talking about the product rule?
Correct.
Would you describe the product rule to us?
So the product rule states that when the probability of two independent events occurring together is the product of their individual probabilities. So at each location, the probability of receiving that from your parents is multiplied by the probability of another location, and then so you can do that throughout the entire profile to determine how rare a profile is.
And how many times have you done that?
Hundreds at least.
Okay. Ever done one by hand?
Maybe once during training.
So you can do the product rule by
Yes.
hand, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So with reference to this case, when did you first get involved in it?
May I refer to my notes?
Pardon?
May I refer to my notes?
Oh, of course, sure.
I began the lab work on March 7th, 2018.
Okay. So I'm going to show you now, Ms. Santiago, State's Exhibit marked 14L, which has previously been identified by another witness as a swab from GEC1A, which is State's Exhibit 270. P15. So you recognize that exhibit?
Yes.
Okay. How do you recognize it?
It has the BSO lab number, the item number, and my initials and date.
Okay. So what did you do with that exhibit?
Inside there's a swab box that contains 2 swabs. So then I took half of each swab head and I put it into a tube, and then I ran it through the DNA extraction procedure and the rest of the procedures that I mentioned.
Okay. And then what?
And then I compared it to the reference sample I had in the case.
Okay, so let me show you now State's Exhibit.
Mark 14X, and ask you if you can identify this with Santiago.
Yes, it has the lab number, the item number, and my initials and date.
Okay, and what is that?
It's the buccal swab from Nikolas Cruz.
Okay, and what is a buccal swab?
A swab of the inside of the cheek.
Okay, and who took that buccal swab from Nikolas Cruz?
The officer's name on the package is listed as Detective Crespo.
Okay, all right, and once you got that, what did you do with it?
I took cuttings from each swab and ran it through the DNA analysis procedure.
Okay, and what was your determination?
For item 241?
Yes. When you say 241, that's your lab number, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The DNA results are consistent with Nikolas Cruz. The chances of randomly selecting an unrelated individual consistent with the evidentiary sample are rarer than 1 in 400 billion.
So what does that mean?
That the chances of randomly selecting a person that would be consistent with that profile are rarer than 1 in 400 billion.
Okay, and did you have an opportunity to get an exact number?
Yes.
What was that?
Uh, 1 in 3.42 times 10 to the 25, or 34.2 septillion.
Okay. And I'm going to show you now State's Exhibit Mark 14O, which is a swab from an ear protection piece that has been previously identified in court, and ask you, Ms. Santiago, if you can identify that.
Yes, again, it has the BSO lab number, the item number, and my initials and date.
Okay, and could you tell us the result of that?
The DNA results from item 251 are consistent with Nikolas Cruz. The chances of randomly selecting an unrelated individual consistent with the evidentiary sample are approximately 1 in 410,000.
Okay. So in order to save some time, I'm going to, well, let me do it this way. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit Mark 14S. Swab of a magazine found in a vest.
Yes, again, it has the lab number, item number, my initials and date.
Okay, and the results?
The DNA results from item 259 are consistent with Nikolas Cruz. The chances of randomly selecting an unrelated individual consistent with the evidentiary sample are rarer than 1 in 400 billion.
Okay. And I'll show you State's Exhibit Mark 14T, another swab from a magazine found in the evidentiary vest that's been introduced in evidence.
Yes, again, this has the lab number, item number, my initials and date.
Okay, and the results of your analysis?
The DNA results from item 260 are consistent with Nikolas Cruz. The chances of randomly selecting an unrelated individual consistent with the evidentiary sample are rarer than 1 in 400 billion.
Okay. And I'm going to show you State's Exhibit
Judge, the
14R.
defense will stipulate that Mr. Cruz's DNA can be found on every item used to commit this crime, if that saves time.
Let me speak to the lawyers for a moment, please.
Okay, so we've been listening to this and kind of wondering, I've been wondering, why do you need to bring up DNA evidence? We know Cruz was the shooter. He confessed to being the shooter. We've seen the evidence. We've seen the gun. We've seen the vest. We've seen the receipt for all of it. Why do we need a DNA expert to say, yes, his DNA is on these items?
This is the one piece of testimony that I've really questioned why they're taking so much time with this. The defense is now going to stipulate that he touched everything, so that may shortcut the rest of the testimony. But let's hear what...
Other items that Ms. Santiago would testify that it's defendant's DNA. is another magazine from the evidence vest that's been introduced. A magazine found.
I'm sorry, which item in evidence is that?
The evidence is 14U. And then State's Exhibit 14W, which is a swab from a magazine from Q39B from the third floor hallway found by Detective Crespo. State's Exhibit 14V, which is a swab from a magazine found in the Teacher's Lounge 1240.
V like Victor or B like?
V like Victor,
Okay.
yes, I'm sorry. Swab from another magazine that was found in the vest left on the third floor stairwell. 14R is the exhibit number. Then a swab, Your Honor, it's from 14M, which is from the magazine that was found in State's Exhibit 270, the Smith & Morrison M&P 15. It's been introduced in evidence. Swab from the vest that I just mentioned. It's been introduced in evidence. It was left on the third floor stairwell, 14P. And another swab from the magazine that was found in the said vest left on the third floor landing, which is 14Q. And then swab from the first floor, a hallway found by Detective Christian, and that's State's Exhibit 10F. Swab from another magazine found on the first floor by Detective Christian and identified by him as 10G. Another swab from the third magazine found by Detective Christian on the first floor of the 1200 building, 10H. Swab from the knife handle found in the backpack found by Detective Christian on the first floor of the first floor hallway of the 1200 building, and it's 10I. Then State's Exhibit 10K, which is a swab from the black ski mask that was found next to the backpack on the first floor found by Detective Christian and testified by him. And as the last one, Your Honor, is 10J, which is a swab from the gray backpack introduced in evidence found by Detective Christian on the first floor hallway. And I am going to introduce these exhibits along with the exhibits that Ms. Santiago testified.
Okay, so members of the jury, the lawyers are stipulating, which is a fancy way of saying agreeing, that the fact that these items were swabbed and tested for DNA, that the DNA is a match to that of Nikolas Cruz. That means that a stipulation means that that fact does not need to be proven. You should consider that fact proven by means of the stipulation.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And Mr. Sutz, the only items I didn't hear you mention were 14N like Nancy and 14L like Larry. I just want to make sure I did not miss those.
14Q, 14M, 14V, 14W, 14U, 14P, 14R, 14G, 14H, 10F, 10I, 10J, 10K, and the items that Ms. Santiago
already testified about, which was 14C, 14L, 14S, and 14O.
And I assume there's no objection based on the stipulation?
No, ma'am.
We're just kind of organize this for a second.
Okay, so everybody agrees that the DNA is on these items. And so maybe this was a strategy by the prosecution, you were thinking, to say, okay, well then let's move forward with this.
I mean, the reason that you want to have DNA is predominantly in a guilt or innocent phase where you're trying to prove the identity of something or of someone or who touched it and how that is relevant to your case in chief. He's pled guilty, so there's no question that he's the person who did it, but the prosecution wanted to be able to argue in closing arguments. You see that vest he was wearing and all those magazines that were stuffed into it, the headset, the muffler that he brought with him, the vest itself, the firearm. You know who touched it? The defendant, Nikolas Cruz. And
So
how did we prove that to you? Because we had him swabbed, we had that swab, DNA, what did she say, 1 in 4 something billion chance that it would be somebody else? That's proof beyond all doubt, even more than a reasonable doubt. And we've proved aggravating factors at least as close as that. So, you know, in a guilt or innocent phase, that makes sense. And the defense wasn't going to stipulate to that because they didn't. You know, prior to a trial, whether it's guilt or innocence or whether it's the penalty phase, you try and get each side to stipulate to things. And as you heard the judge tell the jurors, a stipulation means that there is no dispute about this particular thing, that both sides have stipulated, so you don't even need to factor into your discussions or your deliberations, did somebody prove something? They've stipulated to it. And the defense wasn't going to stipulate to anything. And
Right.
so perhaps this was a backdoor way for the prosecution to say, fine, you won't stipulate to this DNA, we're still bringing it in, we believe it proves and adds, what they've argued was it adds weight to what we're saying are aggravating factors, and the aggravating factor being premeditation, disregard for human life, and so knowing that he touched it beyond every doubt in the world is going to add weight to that so the juror can rely on it. And so you won't stipulate, fine, we're going to go through this and we're going to take an hour to go through this.
And so instead they stipulated, and it gave the state an opportunity to then list off all of the things that he touched, all of the things that the jurors have seen, but just an opportunity to once again mention all of the things that he had in his possession that day.
Correct.
Which I think may have been identified previously as 14N as in Nancy, but we don't have it up here.
No, Your Honor, we don't have it.
No 14, but is there supposed to be a 14H or 14N?
10H.
We have 10H.
14M.
We have that. The clerk and I both heard 14H. I just want to make sure we have everything.
14H is a photo.
Okay.
Your Honor, I have no further questions of Ms. Sands.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and, just give me 1 second, please.
Sure.
All right, well, we think that this witness number 58, she's done. I mean,
that's
right,
what they
there's
were
no more
bringing her to
questions.
testify about. You heard her.
14L will be received as 384. 14M, like Mary, 385. 14O, 386. 14P, like Paul, 387. 14Q, 388. 14R, 389. 14S, like Sam, 390. 14T, like Tom, 391. 14U, 392. 14V, like Victor, 393. 14W, 394. 14X, like X-ray, 395. 10, F as in Frank, 396. 10G, 397. 10H, 398. 10I, 399. 10J, 400. And 10K, 401. Spence, do you have any questions of this witness?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. You're excused.
So, Janine, that could have been a very long witness, a lot of scientific details. He qualified her as an expert to begin with, to tie up who touched these items. Was it Nikolas Cruz? We retrieved all these items. And
of course, we knew it was Nikolas Cruz.
And so now they've moved past this witness called another witness. I don't know if that was a witness that was not available till 1 o'clock. Are they going to run out of witnesses again for today, and he's going to now have run through all that he has, or did he anticipate perhaps this would happen?
And we do believe that we will hear from the medical examiners who have performed the autopsies on all 17 victims, since jurors have to consider all 17. So far, we've been through 8 victims and heard in just excruciating detail the way in which they died. Most of them died as the result of multiple gunshot wounds. We heard about just the sheer firepower that was used against them. And once again, just the contrast of what jurors are hearing and Nikolas Cruz himself, who has been sitting in a sweater with the mask on, head down, looking docile.
And not really focused on the exhibits that are being shown to him. We saw him put his fingers over his ears when they were playing audio the other day. Doesn't look really at the witnesses. He appears to be writing something. Not sure what it is he's writing, discussing with his lawyers.
Meanwhile, the parents in the crowd have been listening very intently, and they have been listening to the way in which their loved ones have died. It was very powerful, very emotional, just gut-wrenching stuff. Now witness number 59 is heading to the stand. So
could be another medical examiner?
Could be. Let's take a listen.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. You can put your hand down and be seated. Well, please speak into the microphone, state your full name, and spell your last name for the record.
Marlon Osborne, Osbourne.
Good afternoon, doctor. What is your occupation?
Good afternoon. My occupation is I'm an associate medical examiner at the Palm Beach County Medical Examiner's Office.
Okay, could you briefly tell us about your educational background?
I graduated from Rutgers College with a BA in biology. I then attended Rutgers New Jersey Medical School and got an MD degree. After that, I attended Hahnemann, H-A-H-N-E-M-A-N-N, University Hospital, Drexel College of Medicine pathology program. After which I did a one-year fellowship at the Miami-Dade Medical Examiner's Office in forensic pathology. And since following that fellowship, I worked for 5 years at the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office. Following those 5 years, I worked at the Broward County Medical Examiner's Office, and I've been at the Palm Beach County Medical Examiner's Office for 3 years.
Okay. Are you licensed to practice medicine?
Yes, I am.
Where?
In Florida.
Okay. A member of any, have any board certifications?
Yes, in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology.
Okay. Have you, how many autopsies have you performed?
Well over 2,500.
Okay. And then of those 2,500 autopsies, have you been able to determine the cause of death?
Yes.
And of those 2,500 approximately autopsies, how many were as a result of gunshot wounds, approximately?
Somewhere over 200, I would say.
Okay. And have you ever testified in a court of record as a forensic pathologist?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
Well over 120 times at this point.
Okay. And in what courts?
Philadelphia, Miami, Broward, Palm Beach counties.
Okay. Dr. Osborne, did there come an occasion on Thursday, February the 15th, 2018, you performed several autopsies?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I'd like to show you now State's Exhibits 22D, 22C, 22B, 22A, 21Z, 21Y, 21X, 21W, and 21V like in Victor. And ask you, Dr. Osborne, would you please take a look at these exhibits and see if you can identify them, please, sir.
Yes, I can.
And did you perform that autopsy on that young lady?
Yes, I did.
And that is Helena Ramsay?
Yes, it is.
Would these photographs help you to explain the nature of the injuries to the court and to the jury?
Yes.
And would these exhibits, these photographs, aid you in explaining to the court and to the jury the manner and cause of death of Helena Ramsay?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to offer these exhibits. I think Mr. Support will receive them, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, does the defense have any objection to the admission of these photographs?
Just going to incorporate all grounds and arguments in DMIL 12. Thank you.
Okay, over the defense objection, 21B, like Victor, will be received as 402. 21W will be received as 403. 21X, like X-ray, will be received as 404. 21Y will be received as 405. 21Z, like Zebra, will be received as 406. 22A, like Alpha, will be received as 407. 22B, like Bravo, will be received as 408. 22C, like Charlie, will be received as 409. 22D, like Delta, will be received as 410.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Dr. Osborne, as the clerk is marking those exhibits, could you tell us the age, weight, and height of Helena Ramsay?
If I may refer to my...
Please.
Miss Ramsay was 17 years old, and she had a height that was 66 inches and 136 pounds.
Okay. And showing you State's Exhibit 207 that's already been introduced in evidence. Recognize her?
Yes.
That's Helena Ramsay?
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Osborne, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit marked 402. And that's labeled H. Could you explain that for us, that wound?
Yes, this wound is on the back of the right side of her head. It goes through the scalp, enters the, fractures these bones of the skull, enters the calvarium, which is where the brain is housed. It causes hemorrhages along and around the brain, lacerations and contusions to the brain, and exits the left side of the forehead.
Okay, and showing you State's Exhibit marked 403. Is that the exit wound you're talking about?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And would that wound be lethal?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Showing you State's Exhibit marked 404. 405, I'm sorry. Could you explain what that shows?
This is showing Miss Ramsay's left side, the left side of her face. You can see the previous wound described as A on the left side of the forehead. Wound D is on the lateral aspect of the left shoulder. There's a wound B on the left side of the chest, and a wound C on the right side of the chest.
Okay. Could you tell us about wound B?
B as in boy?
Yes, B, I'm sorry.
Wound B is an irregular wound on the right side of the chest that goes through the skin and pectoralis muscles, and fragments of a projectile were recovered from within the muscles, the pectoralis muscles.
Okay. And how about wound D?
Wound D is an entrance wound on the lateral aspect of the left shoulder. It goes through the muscles of the left arm and exits on a wound that will be shown later as E on the inside of the left upper arm.
Okay. And how about wound C?
Wound C is an irregular ballistic defect that has a very short wound tract, and no projectiles were recovered from that wound. It only goes into the superficial layers of the pectoralis muscle, just under the skin.
All right. And I'm showing you now State's Exhibit 406.
406 shows the exit wound, E, that corresponds to D, the entrance wound previously described on her left shoulder.
Okay. And what is above the E at her armpit? You see that?
Yes, this is an associated abrasion, likely associated when the bullet exited E. It hit the skin and caused an abrasion.
Okay.
That's what we're seeing on the inside of the armpit.
Okay. And State's Exhibit State's Exhibit 407. wound G?
Wound G is on the lateral aspect of the right leg. It's an entrance wound. And the exit is on the medial aspect of the right thigh.
Okay. And showing you State's Exhibit 458.
And that is wound F. The exit wound for G.
Okay. And showing you 409. Is that a close-up of that wound?
Yes, it is.
And why is that wound so much bigger than the entrance wound?
When you have gunfire from a rifle, there's a larger amount of energy that's produced because of the velocity of the speed of the bullet, and so it creates a larger temporary cavity, and the exit wounds are usually larger in size than the entry wounds when shot from a distance.
Okay. And showing you State's Exhibit looks like 410.
Yes, those are the fragments collected from the wound labeled B on the left side of the chest.
Okay. And were you able to determine the cause of death of Helena Ramsay?
Yes, gunshot wound of head.
Gunshot wound to the head.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Osborne. I'm going to show you now, Doctor, for identification 21S, 21R, 21Q, 21O, 21N, 21P, 21M, 21L, 21K, 21J, 21I. And ask you, Doctor, if you would examine these exhibits and tell me if you recognize it.
Yes.
Okay. And do they truly and accurately depict the autopsy you performed on Gina Montalto?
Yes, they do.
Thursday, February the 15th, 2018?
Yes.
Okay. And would these exhibits aid you in explaining to the court and to the jury the nature of Gina Montalto's wounds?
Yes.
And would these photographs, these exhibits, aid you in explaining to the court and to the jury the manner and cause of death of Gina Montalto?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Your Honor, at this time, the State would offer the previous exhibits read into the record.
Defense for the objection.
Objection on all grounds regarding D, MIL 12. Thank you.
Okay, so noted, thank you. Over the defense objection, the exhibits will be received as follows. 21I will be received as 411, 21J 412, 21K 413, 21L 414, 21M as in Mary 415, 21N like Nancy 416, 21O 417 417, 21P as in Paul 418, 21Q 419, 21R 420, and 21S like Sam 421.
Dr. Osborne, while the clerk is marking those exhibits, could you give us the age and the height and weight of Gina Montalto?
If I may refer.
Sure, please.
Miss Montalto was 14 years old. She was 65 inches tall and weighed 108 pounds.
Okay. I'm showing you State's Exhibit 101. Is that Gina Montalto?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Dr. Osborne, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit now, 411. And you have an A there next to what appears to be a wound. Could you explain that to us, please, sir?
We are looking at the anterior aspect of the left shoulder of Ms. Montalto. And here you can see the...
you can use one of the colors, and if you want to do the telestrator, that's it.
The entrance gunshot wound on the left shoulder. It goes through the area of the left shoulder. It fractures the left scapula and exits on wound F.
Okay. And what did it go through?
It went through the deltoid muscle and the scapula, which is the wing-shaped bone on the back.
Okay. And here's State's Exhibit 412. You said F was the exit.
Yes, that's the corresponding exit.
Okay. And that's the exit for wound A?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now I'm going to show you State's Exhibit marked 413. And you have a B there.
Yes, this is on the anterior aspect of the chest, towards the left side. It's a large wound with seared edges from the 6 o'clock to the 12 o'clock position. This wound goes through the left fifth intercostal space, fractures the left fifth rib anteriorly. It goes into the pericardium and obliterates the apex and the anterior left wall of the left ventricle. It exits the posterior wall of the left ventricle and then goes through the left fifth intercostal space posteriorly to end up in the back muscles.
Okay. And when you, pericardium, that's the heart?
That's the sac that covers the heart.
Okay. And is this wound B fatal in itself?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now you talked about the seared edges. What do you mean?
This purple-black discoloration from the 6 o'clock position along to the 12 o'clock position. It's a characteristic of the wounds, and we use those to give us an idea of how far the end of the gun was from the decedent when it was fired. When we have the end of the gun intimately touching the skin or almost touching the skin, you can have transfer of gases and the heat from the end of the gun, causing abrasions around the actual wound itself. When a gun is fired, rifle or handgun, not only the bullet leaves the end of the gun, you have the gases that are expressed from the combustion causing the bullet to be propelled through the barrel of the gun. Also, you have particles of burnt gunpowder that exit, as well as unburnt particles from inside the barrel of the gun and gunpowder. So if the burnt particles hit the skin, they can leave behind a black or grayish stain, which we call soot. Burning particles, if they hit the skin, can cause small abrasions around the wound itself, and that's called stipple. So the further you are away from the end of the gun, the more likely you are to see some of these characteristics. So if the gun is touching the skin, it can maybe only leave just a searing and an abrasion. You go out a few inches to a couple of feet, you may see soot and or stipple. Beyond a certain point, depending upon the gun, the type of ammo, the gun, you'll see different patterns, but at some point you won't see anything at all. So then we call those wounds we can't tell how far the end of the gun was from the decedent.
So on this wound B, in your opinion, this is a contact wound?
This will be contact or close contact through clothing. Okay.
Even though somebody would be wearing clothes, you could still get the contact wound like that, right?
You can get the heat transfer that would cause the abrasion and searing if it's intimately close.
Okay. And that's what this wound B shows, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now showing you State's Exhibit Mark 414. You have a C there.
C is a wound on the left side of the upper abdomen. It too has a seared abrasion collar, nearly circumferentially, which is all around the wound itself. This wound goes through the abdominal wall. It perforates the left lobe of the liver. It perforates the stomach. It goes through her spleen and perforates her left kidney and goes through the back muscles to be just beneath the area designated as G on the left side of the back, where a bullet is recovered.
Okay. And I'm going to show you now State's Exhibit 415. Could you explain, it's a close-up of wound C, the searing you're talking about?
This and faint muzzle abrasion is the area here just outside the edges of the wound.
And what's that indicate to you?
That the end of the gun, the muzzle, was in contact through clothing to the skin.
Okay. Another contact wound.
Contact through clothing, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I'll show you now State's Exhibit marked 417.
That is a wound labeled D on the back of the right hand here. And that goes through, fractures the bones in the middle of the hand, and exits on the palm of the right hand. Wound E.
All right. Do you know what's a defensive wound?
Wounds that are defensive are considered wounds, are parts of the body that someone would use to defend themselves from any kind of incoming attack. So they could be wounds on parts of the extremities, from the hands to the forearms to even the upper arm, depending upon how that limb could be placed in front of other parts of the body, mostly the torso where the vital organs are, to protect itself from incoming assault.
So if somebody put their hand up like this?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 417.
That's the exit wound E for the entrance wound D that was previously described.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 418, and I think you mentioned exit wound G before?
Well, G is a slight contusion and dippling of the skin, which a bullet was recovered from, and that is the corresponding bullet for the entrance wound C on the abdomen.
Okay, and F?
F, again, is the exit wound for the entrance wound on the anterior aspect of the left shoulder, A.
Okay. Based on your examination, Dr. Osborne, are you able to tell the order of the shots that hit Gina Montalto?
No, I can't specifically say the specific order in which they occurred.
Okay. Was the, how about hemorrhaging in the track of the wound?
All wound tracks had some degree of hemorrhage.
So there's no way you can tell, for instance, that A and D came before B and C?
The natures of B and C, if wound D is considered a defensive wound, that could have come before the more contact wounds on the body. There isn't any distinct irregularity to the entrance wound D, and afterwards exiting on E, there might be some distortion of the bullet. However, the wound A looks like a typical entrance wound without any irregularity, and wounds C and B were close through clothing, so I don't think the hand could have gotten in between those wounds. Okay. So D likely came before the other three wounds, but I can't tell you the order in which the other three occurred.
Okay. And how about the cause of death of Gina Montalto?
Multiple gunshot wounds.
Okay. I'm showing you State's Exhibit Mark 419.
Those are the fragments collected for from the back muscles associated with gunshot wound B to the chest.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 420.
That was a deformed bullet fragment that was collected from her hair.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 421.
That is the separate jacket and core of the bullet that went through the abdomen.
Okay. All right, Dr. Osborne, thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Thanks. Any questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, sir. You're excused.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I have some more questions.
Okay.
I don't know. Marjorie. Dr. Osborne, I'd like to now show you State's Exhibit 22I, 22H, 22G, and 22F. And ask you, Dr. Osborne, if you're good enough to again look at these exhibits. See if you recognize.
Yes.
Okay. What are they?
They're the photographs from the autopsy of Miss Jamie Guttenberg.
Did you perform the autopsy on Jamie Guttenberg?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And would those photographs assist you in explaining to the court and to the jury the nature of Jamie Guttenberg's wounds?
Yes, they would.
And would those photographs aid you in explaining to the court and to the jury the manner and cause of death of Jamie Guttenberg?
Yes.
Okay, Your Honor, just tell me what those exhibits read into the record, please, Your Honor.
Is there any objection?
Yes, ma'am, we object on all grounds outlined in D, MIL 12.
Okay, over the defense objection, State's Exhibit 22F, like Frank, will be received as 422. 22G will be received as 423. 22H will be received as 424. And 22I will be received as 425.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Dr. Osborne, while the clerk is marking those exhibits, could you tell us the age, height, and weight of Jamie Guttenberg, please?
She was 14 years old, weighed 104 pounds, and was 64 inches tall.
I'm showing you State's Exhibit 114. Do you recognize her?
Yes, that is Miss Guttenberg.
Doctor. I'm going to show you now State's Exhibit 422. And you have that wound labeled A.
Yes, this is the entrance wound on the left side of the back of the left shoulder.
And could you tell us about the wound track?
This wound tract goes through the back muscles, fractures the left first and second ribs posteriorly, enters the left chest cavity, perforates the upper lobe of the left lung, perforates the body of the seventh cervical vertebrae, and exits the base of the right side of the neck at wound B.
Okay. And showing you State's Exhibit 423.
So this is the base of the right side of the neck. This is wound B here with associated abrasions along the clavicular area.
And B is the exit wound of A, correct?
Correct.
And what damage
The
did...
photo is not showing.
Pardon?
The photo is not showing. Oh, now it is. It went off for a second.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you did that on purpose.
No, I didn't do anything.
Okay.
No.
Was it off?
It went off for a second, yes.
Okay. Do it again, please, Doctor. B is the exit wound for A?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and could you describe, the damage that wound, that bullet caused?
It fractured the left first and second ribs, disrupting the normal spatial atmosphere of the left chest cavity, making it difficult to breathe. It also injured the upper lobe of the left lung, causing compromise of the ability to do gas exchange and use that portion of the lung. Additionally, there was 300 milliliters of blood that was present at autopsy in the left chest cavity that likely compromised the expansion of the left lung that led to death.
Okay, and what was the cause of death of Jamie Guttenberg?
Gunshot wound of neck and torso.
Okay, and why?
As I explained, her ability to use her left lung was severely compromised by the entry of the gunshot wound and the path it took crossing through the left chest cavity, as well as the injury to the spinal cord as it fractured the seventh cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord at that level. That would effectively lead her to not be able to use any bodily function or have purposeful movement lower than that level. And additionally, that would also affect her respirations.
All right, thank you, Dr. Osmond. Your Honor, now I have no further questions of Dr. Osmond.
Thank you so much.
So that's what we have for today.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I guess this is going to be another early day for you. We're going to recess until tomorrow. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves. Please do not discuss the case with anyone at all at home, here, in the courthouse, or on your way to your cars. If anyone tries to discuss the case with you, please tell them that you are on the jury. Please leave the person at once, and please report the matter immediately. Other than that, please leave your notepads on your chairs, and have a nice afternoon, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you for your patience.
Done for the day, but this was an extremely busy day for the state, and once again they ended the day with a very impactful note, testimony by medical examiner Dr. Marlon Osborne, who did the autopsies of 3 students, Helena Ramsay, Gina Montalto, and Jamie Guttenberg. You can see the Montaltos are there in court, and they had to listen to, and so did the Guttenbergs, they had to listen to how their loved ones died that day in 2018.
And we've commented on this before. It's tough on them, but as they, most or many of them have stated this.
Have been excused. Walker, whenever you're ready, you're excused, and we're going to be in recess until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We'll start back up with the state's presentation.
Does not sound like there's any other business for the attorneys today, but what you're saying, David, is it's gut-wrenching but necessary for the state.
Necessary for the state. We've now heard the autopsies of 11 of the victims. That means 6 remain, and they wanted, some of them have said that they wanted to do this to show support for their now dead children and loved ones. Others, they want the world to see what's going on, and certainly it gives them some closure as they head into the rest of this phase. They know that that's behind them. They've heard the worst now, and now they need to see what the result's going to be. One of the interesting bits of testimony that we heard today from the last medical examiner was as to Gina Montalto, just exactly how close Cruz was when he fired this weapon.
And keep in mind, we heard from the state when they described where everyone was and what they were doing, Gina was on her laptop sitting outside.
And from what his testimony was, and we heard him talk about what's expelled from the end of the gun, the fact that there is not only a bullet projectile that comes out, but gunpowder that comes out, and that he can tell, scientifically, he can tell from burn marks on the body just how close that gun was fired. And his testimony was, with regard to Gina Montalto, that Cruz was close enough that there were burned flesh marks on her body from just how close the muzzle of that firearm was. Now, it's a very powerful gun. He may not have been directly on top of her, but the picture that paints for the jury is a defendant, a killer, who is standing in front of this victim who's seated on the ground working on her laptop, and he just opens fire on her and kills her from a very close range. Again, an aggravating factor, just showing the depth of what he was doing here and showing to these jurors that as to that victim, there is certainly an aggravating factor for them to find.
Absolutely. We've spoken to these family members, and we talked about this before the lunch recess, about how so many of them feel it's their duty and their honor to be in the courtroom because they want to bear witness. They want others to do it too. Tony Montalto, I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago. He said he and his wife, Jennifer, they did plan to be there when appropriate today. Presumably, he knew that today would be the medical examiner's testimony today, and so he wanted to be there because he felt that he said, I will always take every opportunity I have to represent my strong, smart daughter, Gina. He felt that it was his duty to be there today, and it was excruciating watching him and his wife.
Absolutely. But again, a necessary part of the state's presentation. And as difficult as it is for us to sit here from afar and watch what's going on, the jurors are seeing these pictures. And again, we heard yesterday from Christina Vesquez, who's been given access to these pictures. These are gruesome photos, and these jurors are seeing these gruesome photos. They can see them again if they want to take them back to the jury room, but somehow I doubt that. And then what still remains is for them to go out to the crime scene, where we heard descriptions yesterday. We're hearing more descriptions today about the amount of blood that's still left there, the carnage that's still present there. The judge has signed an order that she's going to take a preview of the crime scene herself just to evaluate it before they take the jurors out.
But just to evaluate it, she can't then rule, okay, they're not going to be able to see it. I mean, it's...
She's already ruled that they are going to be able to see it. She's changed her mind before she could go back, but she's already made her ruling. I believe that the reason she's doing this preliminary review is just simply to wrap her head around how they're going to conduct this crime scene visit, how they're going to get all the jurors out there, and we talked about this yesterday, how they're going to have to take them out, how Cruz is going to have to go out, the prosecution, the defense. Nobody can have any conversation about it. And then the identities of these jurors is unknown. I mean, if you want to walk to the courthouse and take a look at them, you can, but so they have to protect the identities of these 22 jurors as well. To
and
get
Nikolas
them in
Cruz
and out
also
of the
has
crime
the
scene.
right to be there, and so...
There's been some argument about whether or not he can waive that right, whether or not the judge is going to let him waive that right. Certainly, nobody wants to make a mistake as to that point. It's a critical stage of the proceedings. He has a right to be there. There are some rules, there are some cases that interpret when you can and you can't waive that right, whether a judge has to accept that waiver, but they're trying to protect the record here, the state. You don't want to let him waive something that you get through all of this. They recommend 17 death sentences, and then a court of appeal says, well, you shouldn't have let him waive his right to be present at that critical stage of the proceeding.
Which explains why the defense is making some of the objections that they're making. It's just to have it on the record in case there's an appeal. Well, today was really just another very powerful and emotional day for the state, wrapping up early today, although they did get to a lot today. Tomorrow is the last day of the week that court is scheduled, so we may be hearing from more medical examiners tomorrow.
They may close with medical examiner testimony. Again, we keep recounting, well, what's left? What else is there for them to introduce? His videotape statement that he posted on social media before he went in there, that hasn't been introduced yet. Whether or not they choose to put in any statements he made after he was arrested to the police, whether that's something they think is going to bolster their aggravating factors or whether they're just going to let the defense try and introduce that to show that it's a mitigating factor. And then there's really, not that much left. I'm sure there's something I'm missing, something that I'm not accounting for.
Video from the attack on the corrections officer, that's going to be looked at as an aggravating factor as well. So we'll see what happens. Tomorrow's another day. It's set to begin at 9 o'clock in the morning. You won't miss a minute. We'll be right there. We'll see you then.